What do Albert Einstein, Nikola Tesla, and Charles Darwin all have in common?
Well, they all had great minds, were prolific thinkers and scientists, did some amazing groundbreaking work that advanced humanity's knowledge of the universe and how it works by leaps and bounds. But, since you're a feminist, and thus likely have a very shallow view of the world based on not whole individuals, but only on their identity, I'm guessing you're going to ignore all of that and go with penis.
A lot. What do those guys have in common with me? Not so much.
Yeah, they don't really have a lot in common with most people. In fact, they were quite extraordinary. Hence the whole, great minds, advanced humanities knowledge thing that I just mentioned. That's kind of why they're famous and revered. They were a cut above the rest of us and did great things. But you do realize that we're admiring them for those things and not their penises, right? I mean, don't get me wrong, Tesla might have had a magnificent penis. And Einstein, he could have been hung like a tripod. I'm just saying that their penis is not what we are venerating when we talk about them. Okay, I don't know. Maybe some freaky deaky people out there do venerate Einstein's penis. This is the internet we're talking about after all. But most of us don't really care about it.
Growing up, when I thought about groundbreaking innovators, people like that were who came to mind first. People who had accomplished unbelievable things, but who came from different backgrounds than me, who looked different from me, and who probably behaved a lot differently than me.
Maybe that's because people like you tend to be generally useless. I mean, I'm just saying, but if all of the great innovators and thinkers that you can name are not like you, maybe the problem is actually you. But since, you know me and, well, I'm a giver, well, let me help you out here. This is Theano of Crotona, a revered philosopher and mathematician from the 6th century BC. This is Hypatia, a famed astronomer and mathematician from the 5th century AD. She was the head of the Neoplatonist school of thought and taught in Alexandria itself. This is Émilie du Châtelet. Émilie du Châtelet was a famed French mathematician, physicist, and author, well regarded by many other great thinkers of her time, such as Voltaire. One of her many contributions was the prediction of infrared light long before it was found to have actually existed. Hedy Lamarr, an amazingly gorgeous actress and an inventor during World War II. She developed spread spectrum and frequency hopping technologies to help prevent communications jamming of the Allied signals. The principles of her work became the basis for most cellular, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth technologies that we use now. Vice Admiral Grace Hopper of the American Navy, one of the original programmers of the Harvard Mark I, and a woman who has so many awards and commendations for her work in the tech industry that I could spend 2 entire videos just talking about her alone. You see? It's actually not that hard to find capable women in science, if you're actually looking for them, as opposed to only pointing to the male scientists and wondering why they aren't women like you.
So when I realized that I loved studying and working in science, it kind of came as a surprise.
Considering how the rest of the video is going to go, yeah, I'm surprised you like science too.
And what I've learned is that
Uh-oh. The dogma she downloaded is causing a conflict with her natural logic centers. Her brain needs a reboot. Also, you might want to knock it off with all the fucking fidgeting. It makes you look insincere and unconfident in what you're saying. It also conveys the message that you're not being honest. Oh yeah, that's it, isn't it? It's because you know full well that everything you're about to say is bullshit, but there's some feminist overlord on the other end of that fucking headset telling you what you need to say.
my own background and my limited view about my future is actually far from uncommon. Women are seriously underrepresented in science, technology, engineering, and math, collectively known as the STEM fields. Men outnumber women 1 to 6 in college engineering.
Malfunction, error.
Men outnumber women 1 to 10, actually, in college engineering classes, 1 to 6 in the engineering workforce.
Okay, 2 things here. First off, what you actually meant to say there was that men outnumber women 10 to 1 in engineering classes and 6 to 1 in the engineering world. When stating a ratio, the nouns that the numbers represent need to come in the same order as the numbers themselves. What you just said is actually nonsensical, as you're saying that men outnumber women, yet the number or the ratio that you're giving means that women would outnumber men. Seriously, this is basic math. I mean, I suck at math, and I can do this. Number 2. If women to men is a 1 to 10 ratio in classes, but the ratio is 1 to 6 that actually get into the field, then women would actually be overrepresented in engineering, in the sense that only 10% of those trying to get in are women, yet 18% of the workforce is made up by them. In other words, there is likely a hiring bias in favor of women, which, not uncoincidentally, brings me to the National Academy of the Sciences and a study that they released a few months ago declaring that women were favored in hiring positions over men at a 2 to 1 ratio. To quote, "The underrepresentation of women in academic science is typically attributed, both in scientific literature and in the media, to sexist hiring. Here we report 5 hiring experiments in which faculty evaluated hypothetical female and male applicants using systematically varied profiles disguising identical scholarship for assistant professorships in biology, engineering, economics, and psychology. Contrary to prevailing assumptions, men and women faculty members from all 4 fields preferred female applicants 2 to 1 over identically qualified males with matching lifestyles, single, married, divorce, with the exception of male economists who showed no gender preference. Comparing different lifestyles revealed that women preferred divorced mothers to married fathers, and that men preferred mothers who took parental leaves to mothers who did not. Our findings, supported by real-world academic hiring data, suggest advantages for women launching academic science careers. These results suggest it is a propitious time for women launching careers in academic science. Messages to the contrary may be discouraging women from applying for STEM tenure track assistant professorships. So it really kind of seems to me as though women have kind of a leg up in today's society, in much the same way that women are consistently scoring higher on tests, are more likely to be in advanced courses, have more scholarships and grants offered to them, and are often favored by their teachers. Women are also favored as to be hired. Really, it seems to me that the only way that women get into STEM fields any easier is if we wrote the tests for them. Yet, notably, most women still don't want to go into those fields. Or, more precisely, they don't go into the fields that you want to pay attention to. Women are the majority in many STEM fields, like geology, psychology, nursing, etc., but acknowledging women's advantages doesn't help the bullshit flow freely, now does it?
And the women who do have STEM careers end up making on average only 86 cents to a man's dollar.
Bullshit. But the wage gap has been so thoroughly debunked, I don't really need to point this out, do I? I'd ask her to cite her evidence, but honestly, I don't think that she even knows where these figures come from. She clearly doesn't know how to interpret data, or she'd realize that the gap isn't due to sexism.
But we don't need to know the statistics to understand the current culture of STEM.
Wait, what?
But we don't need to know the statistics to understand the current culture of STEM.
Wait, what?
All we need to do is watch an episode of Silicon Valley, a show about a tech startup, and wonder, where are the women in this world, and what are they doing?
Oh yeah, of course. Who needs statistics and facts? I mean, when you really want to learn about how reality operates, all you really need to do is go to the people who write fictional stories for entertainment. Any true scientist always knows to do their research on the tube. No scientific journal could ever hope to hold up next to TV Guide. I mean, if you weren't basing your opinions off of fiction, what else would you base them off? Reality? Pfft, take that, knowing things.
But in our society, the lack of women in STEM has become so normalized that most young girls don't even really consider pursuing a career in one of these fields.
Well, if the majority of women don't want to do something and have never wanted to do something, then it's not actually being normalized. It is just in and of itself normal. In order to normalize something, there would have had to have at some point been a state of affairs where the situation was different. See, okay, when you try to say that this has been normalized, you're trying to imply that this is something that is somehow being imposed upon women, rather than acknowledging that this is merely something that women have never done or shown any interest in doing. In other words, you're ignoring women's choices and women's actions and essentially treating them as objects who exist only to be, used, shaped, and manipulated by society, and you're trying to do that to them yourself. You're the ones trying to normalize shit. You're trying to take what you want and make it the normal way of doing things, while using Orwellian doublespeak to at the same time trash things for being the norm. How do your brains not implode in on themselves? I tried to hold these two conflicting thoughts in my head for even a second, and my limbic node was desperately trying to consume my frontal in order to survive.
Why is this? Some people will tell you that women just aren't as adept at hard sciences and quantitative reasoning as men. But that's definitely not true.
Because the feminist overlord on the other end of my headset said so. Now, I know that facts and statistics can't possibly compete with your television-based learning, but just for shits and giggles, let's look at some data, such as this study, which I will of course link in the low bar below. Even though female high school students are better prepared academically than their male classmates on many different measures, both overall and for mathematics specifically, female high school students score significantly lower on the SAT math test, and the plus 30-point differences in test scores favoring males has persisted for generations and exists across all ethnic groups. At the high end of math performance, high school males significantly outperformed their female peers on the 2015 SAT math test by a ratio of 1.6 to 1 for scores between 700 and 800, and that outcome has persisted for many decades. Despite the persistent statistically significant differences in math performance by gender on the math SAT test that have continued for generations, we hear statements like this: there just aren't gender differences anymore in math performance, according to University of Wisconsin-Madison psychology professor Janet Hyde, who says further that parents and teachers need to revise their thoughts about this. Stereotypes are very, very resistant to change, but as a scientist, I have to challenge them with data. Given the significant and persistent gender differences in SAT math test scores that have persisted over many generations across all ethnic groups, the scientific data about gender differences in math performance would seem to present a serious challenge to Professor Hyde's frequent claims that there are no gender differences in math performance. Further, the fact that women are underrepresented in STEM occupations and hold only 26% of STEM jobs, according to a 2013 Department of Commerce report, certainly isn't because female students are being discouraged from studying math and science in high school. In fact, the evidence shows that females are excelling in math and science in high school. They outnumber males in AP honors math and science courses, and are more likely than their male counterparts to take 4 years of math and science courses. Further, compared to boys, high school girls get better grades on average and are far more likely to graduate in the top 10% of their high school classes, and are much more likely than boys to attend and graduate from college and go on to graduate schools. By all objective measures, girls have essentially all of the necessary ingredients that should result in greater representation in STEM fields, like engineering and computer science, except perhaps for one huge, statistically significant except for one, a huge statistically significant and persistent 30-point gender gap on the SAT math test in favor of boys that has persisted for more than 40 years. If there are some inherent gender differences for mathematical ability, as the huge and persistent gender differences for the math SAT test suggests, closing the STEM gender degree and job gaps may be a futile attempt in socially engineering an unnatural and unachievable outcome. Lastly, I invite you to take a look at the following interviews with two respected members of the scientific community.
For this pattern be that women all over the world are, they are encouraged to, you're a woman, to communicate, to talk, to be social.
Well, it's possible, and certainly there's some truth to that, but you would expect it to change somewhat across countries if cultures were a big influence on this. It was absolutely consistent across the 53 nations. In other words, that was every bit as strong in Norway as it was in Saudi Arabia or Pakistan or India or Singapore or Malaysia. It was just, that's a big difference between men and women, and it seems to be a big difference in all the 50.
Because for a long time, this topic was taboo within psychology. Researchers tried to avoid the topic, and if sex differences came up at all, they were dismissed as being purely the result of culture, purely the result of postnatal experience. So I'm going to start the topic of sex differences by looking at the brain rather than behavior, and then move to behavior in a minute. So this first slide is simply showing differences, first of all, in brain volume between typical boys and girls. So boys in blue and girls in red. And this is simply showing that, on average, there are differences in total brain volume. But the other thing you can see here is differences in the rate of growth of the typical male and female brain, that in females, in girls, the brain is reaching its peak volume at an earlier age to boys. It's about a 1-year difference. So we can see differences in total size, but also in rate of growth. Still at the level of the brain, you can look at individual structures, so not just lobes, but particular structures, and find sex differences. These are just two by illustration. In females, the planum temporale involved with language is larger on average than in males, and the amygdala shows the opposite pattern, being larger in males, at least in childhood. So these are showing that regions that are associated with specific functions, the amygdala, of course, being quite complex, but associated with emotion processing, and as we'll see later, with recognizing emotions in others, seems to show a sex difference. Some researchers, as you may know, have used functional MRI to look at sex differences, and found even within the amygdala there are sex differences showing laterality effects. So, for example, when subjects are asked to remember emotional stimuli, women show more activity in the left amygdala, and men show more in the right. This is the work of Larry Cahill and colleagues from several years ago. So there are differences in both brain structure and brain function in terms of average sex differences. A final example of neural sexual dimorphism comes from looking at neurotransmitters, and I thought this slide was really quite dramatic in showing that males produce much more serotonin than females. These are studies using PET, positron emission tomography, where you deplete the brain of serotonin and then look at the rate of synthesis of this neurotransmitter. So I think the idea that there are differences in the brain between males and females should no longer be a topic of controversy, and the question really is, what is its importance, its significance, and how does it come about? So now I move to the level of behavior.
So yeah, maybe we don't all know that it isn't true, but feel free to show all those other scientists how they're wrong. I'm sure they're just too busy gathering evidence to watch TV and learn real stuff like you.
Others will tell you that women just aren't interested in STEM. And this idea is a little more complicated.
Actually, it's pretty simple. You're just gonna bugger it up, but, do go on.
We know that boys and girls report equivalent levels of interest throughout school up until high school. But at high school, interest begins to decline in girls. But I think there's more to the story, and girls aren't losing their interest in STEM for no reason.
Wait, you think? You mean you didn't bother to actually doing your research before you started this?
In science, getting answers is the easy part, especially answers we want to hear.
I really wish you understood how funny it is to hear you say that.
But the hard part, and the most important part, is making sure that we're asking the right questions in the first place. There's been a huge effort aimed at trying to prepare women for the STEM world. But I think maybe the real question is, how can we prepare the STEM world for women?
Ooh, I have a good question too. Since we all know that men are severely underrepresented in feminism, how can we prepare feminism for men? Personally, I say strippers. Get some strippers, some booze, some bitches. Maybe you could jump out of a cake or something because you are hell of a hot. I think that would go a long way to making feminism much more inviting for men. You're cool with that, right?
I, I think that this lack of interest we're seeing is largely driven by some unwelcoming aspects of STEM industry, like the prevailing boys' club culture in many areas of science and tech.
Ah, the mysterious boys' club culture. It's kind of funny how everything that isn't distinctly for women is somehow always a boys' club or a male space, even if it is something in which both sexes are allowed to participate freely in with no restrictions, even if there are a large number of women already present. Kind of like how fitness centers now have girls-only days or areas, while there are none specifically for men only allowed, because it would be discriminating against women to do such a thing. But it's okay because, as feminists claim, everywhere else is a man's space. Except there are no places anymore that are allowed to be men only. But men are allowed, so it's their space and their space only. Binary thinking really makes it easy to deal with cognitive dissonance, huh? I'm curious as to how you feel about the girls' club culture of feminism, or nursing, or psychology, or veterinary medicine. What's that? You're okay with those? Oh, alright then.
You can ask women who work in these fields, and a lot of them will tell you that they end up hiding their femininity and they strive to be one of the guys in order to avoid being ostracized by their colleagues.
So, fashion. That's what you're going to say is keeping women out. That was the best that you had. Women can't be scientists because the fashion choices aren't to their liking. How many isn't a lot exactly? And how exactly do they know that they, or rather you, because I know that you're actually just talking about yourself and projecting it outwards, are being ostracized because they are feminine? Did you actually ask them why they didn't want anything to do with you, or are you just assuming? See, here's something you might have missed. In professional environments, you are expected to dress as such. This is regardless of your gender. A man cannot walk into a science lab or lecture dressed like he's going out for a night of clubbing and expect to be taken seriously. Nor can he stand in front of his class in a university wearing his bathroom slippers, Metallica t-shirt, and a pair of dealy boppers on his head. You dress to give people the impression that you wish to portray. And in a science lab, or in the business world in general, there are certain standards and expectations of dress and behavior, for men as well. This is that very convenient binary thinking again. If something is not all for girls, then it must be for all men. It can't actually be gender neutral, which is what it is. Men cannot be overtly masculine in a professional environment, just as women cannot be overly feminine. You must be generic, so that all that speaks about you is your work. This is what matters, the work you do, and how good you are at the job itself. Did it ever occur to you that the reason so many women don't dress feminine in those fields is because they don't actually care to dress all frilly due to their having actual work to do? Well, that and the obvious safety hazards of having things like skirts, earrings, long flowing hair, not to mention the potential for having such good clothes ruined by things like chemical spills and the like, which you'd probably know if you had actually spent any amount of time in a fucking lab. Now, I know that you like to describe yourself as a girly girl that is in the science field, and you want to dress up all pretty, but that is not the standard of the job that you are going into. Now, if you don't want to follow those standards, that's fine, but if you're not going to follow the standards of the group, why do you act surprised that the group does not want you around? Do you know what a self-fulfilling prophecy this is? You are deliberately acting in such a way that sets you apart from others in your field, and then complaining about the fact that others treat you as though you are set apart from said others in said field. And just to add the rancid turd of entitlement onto this shitcake of reasoning, you demand that everyone else change their standards just to accommodate you. Because it's not that you need to learn to be a scientist, it's that science and everyone else has to change to suit you. Or rather to suit women. And by women, you mean you. I can't imagine why no one would want to be around someone like you. Especially intelligent people who are trying to do serious work instead of their nails. But what do I know? I'm just a guy. Let's ask an actual woman in tech.
In tech. I worked in tech. And by the way, this story that there are not women in technology and women are being pushed out of tech fields, it's not true. I knew tons of women who went into science. Most of them went into biology, chemistry, those types of pure sciences. A lot of them went into veterinary school or to become doctors or what have you. Engineering, when people think tech, they tend to think engineering. The kind of women who go into engineering are usually a little bit more masculine in their affect. And you say that and they go, oh, that's sexism. But it's the truth. Like, I worked with nothing but men. I loved working with men because there was none of this emotional bullshit ever. Well, that's not true. Some of the guys could be bitchy. But, overall, it was a much easier field for someone like me to navigate. But the thing that nobody's talking about, and people say, well, why'd you leave tech? Well, people talk about these good old boy networks in technology, like this is really like an overarching thing. There's a patriarchy keeping the women down. And it's not true. It's simply not true. Half of the VPs when I worked in aerospace were women. A lot of the female engineers, because they were really good at giving presentations and they were actually good at the politicking, advanced far more quickly than my male colleagues did. That's the truth. And so this fear campaign that they're telling these young girls that tech is an unsuitable environment and the men are going to keep them down. I never experienced that. I came in, my first internship job was in the precision mechanics laboratory in an aerospace company, precision mechanisms. And I worked in the tribology section, which means ball bearings. I worked on ball bearings. I still work with balls. And, guess how many women were in that lab? One. It was me. Why? Because most of the women got bored in there. It's tedious, boring work. And you really got to geek out on this stuff. And even a lot of the guys that I worked with at the time said to me, really, you're going to advance through this and you'll get promoted out of it. And that's that. And so this nonsense about women being held back in tech, I found, and I can tell you from firsthand experience, the men I worked with were excited to have a woman around who wanted to learn something like tribology. I was never axed out of anything. As a woman, you have privilege in these tech environments, especially when you're one of the few, because the men will want to have you around. They're excited. A lot of the older guys were so happy to share their knowledge with a young person. It didn't matter to them. A lot of them encouraged their own daughters to go into tech. So this bullshit narrative that these feminists are pushing, and by the way, look at these women who are telling you that it's so unfriendly. They're all women who are incompetent. They are. That's why they're complaining. They're complaining because they couldn't cut it in these environments. And they're mad about it. And you know what? I left that environment. I'm the first one to tell you, like, a lot of the issues that there were in these tech environments that existed, a lot of them were corporate. And by the way, girls, I'm just going to tell you something that is considered to be sexist to say, but a lot of the women left tech because they wanted to have families and they wanted to have children and they wanted to be home for their children. And I don't care if you're a man or a woman, you're not going to miss your 3 or 4 or 5 o'clock meetings because you got to go pick your kids up. This is the truth. And this is why for eons, men worked and women stayed with the kids. And that's not sexist to say. If you have children and you want to be with your children, that's a normal biological response. And that's something that, again, like, these feminists are not talking about this. A lot of the women that I knew when I worked in corporate followed that feminist hero's roar model, and they hit 35 and they wanted to get married and have kids, and they couldn't afford it.
That's a little ridiculous.
No, it's not ridiculous. It's feminist, which is a far, far lower level. What's ridiculous is that you actually graduated with a degree while simultaneously having no idea what evidence means. And even worse, you graduated from a real college. Seriously, look at this. Look at this right here. This is the degree from the college that she graduated at. Look, it's a real degree from a real college. No star stickers or smiley faces anywhere. Fuck.
So, what are we going to do about it?
I don't know. Maybe do research and gather evidence. Figure out if these problems are actually problems first before we waste resources on them.
I think we can start off by discussing these issues that we've experienced and making sure that we're not going through them alone. What I learned through some of my mentors at UNM in college.
Mentors who were all men, as near as I can tell from your information in the below bar of the video and what I could find online. I guess the boys club was making an exception for you because you're so special, right, Snowflake?
Is that somebody can really thrive from just having someone else believe in them. I always thought that I wasn't science material, but I was lucky enough to come across teachers and employers who had no doubts about my ability and set no limits on what I was capable of doing. So eventually, when I looked at the data about myself, I was forced to conclude that I could be a scientist.
When you looked at the data about yourself. Oh, well, there's a totally non-biased source. Yeah, you'd make a perfect scientist there, Cupcake.
And importantly, I could be a leader in science.
Forgetting your lines, not looking up at your audience, cracking voice, playing with your hands, and claims not backed up with evidence. Yeah, clearly you're a model leader for the scientists.
So I got really excited about this. And for the past couple of years, I've worked with an organization that offers free science education to kids in the South Valley neighborhood in Albuquerque.
So just to be clear, you are not now, nor have you ever done any actual science work.
And what I've taken away from this experience is Albuquerque is an amazing place because there's so many women doing incredible things in STEM. And you're going to be hearing from a couple of them later today. And these women can serve as incredible role models. If you take an uncertain kid, show her someone who came from a similar background and who's doing incredible things, and offer her an opportunity to lead the group, you can inspire some serious growth and confidence.
Confidence, yes, but not necessarily competence. No matter how much people pat you on the back and tell you that you're a great and amazing scientist, it's not actually going to be true. You're just going to end up with a bunch of shitty scientists who can't understand or accept when they're wrong. Case in point. And that's the sad thing about all of this. When you fail as a scientist, and you will fail, you're going to run around and blame it on men and boys clubs rather than actually look at yourself and your own obvious failings as a scientist and as a person. That's how an ideology like yours works. It cripples you first and then tell you that you need its help to be whole again.
So, I want to see my organization and others step up and offer a voice to girls in the world through STEM mentorship. I believe that if we share...
Come on, she did it again. Can we get another host here? This model is clearly defective.
who we are, what we bring to our jobs, and what we bring to the world, we can create amazing things.
Just to be clear again, you are not now, nor have you ever done any actual science work.
So, if we want to invest in the future of our society, let's all get our 86 cents together and we can make some big changes.
But again, that's not inspiration. That's just... Yes, but that's not inspiration. That's just narcissism. Okay, look, you seem to be confused here. Inspiration comes from looking at the world in a new and different way. That's why people look up to people who have traits that they lack, because the point is to work towards being like them. Richard Dawkins does not look to Sam Harris for inspiration, and vice versa, because they are both brilliant men and accomplished scientists. There's nothing on that level that they can use to inspire one another with. Men who are inspired by Dawkins are inspired by his intellect and his wit, not his genitals. They want to be smart like him, to have his wit, his prestige, and those things are gender neutral. I can find more than a few women that are inspiring to me. Have you ever read the bio on Madame Curie? That chick kicked ass. One of only 3 Nobel Prize winners to receive a prize in 2 different fields, largely taught herself and learned in underground schools at a time when her country was controlled by the Russians, and her entire country was forbidden from attending anything but the state-sponsored schools. In her country, under the Russians, just educating herself could have been imprisonment or execution. But she not only did that, she helped educate her sister and paid for her schooling. She was a petticoat-clad badass. It's a pity that all you see in her is a vagina for you to play victim over. There are some lessons she could teach you about what it's really like to look down and be kept out. Look, what you want is validation, not inspiration. You want to be patted on the head and have someone tell you that yes, you're a woman, but you can do this. You can do anything because you're strong and awesome, and the power of the vajayjay compels you. You want to see other women doing it because you don't have the lady balls to do it yourself, with your own will. You don't actually want to work to be like them. You want to be told that you are like them, even if the similarity is something as superficial and meaningless as their pee-pee parts. And you want to be recognized by everyone else, which is why being a part of the group was such a big deal for you. You want to be told that you're special and capable, you just don't want to actually do the fucking work.